Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Ryan Stubblebine. Thank you, and you may begin.
Thank you very much. Hi out there, everyone. Hopefully everybody's doing well today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ryan Stubblebine, and I am detailed here at the NCPTT for the next few months to kind of help with the 508 compliance and also as a visual information specialist. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. Is we're going to talk about what 508 compliance is and really get us to start thinking about how we can start incorporating that into our daily workflows so that we're meeting those requirements moving forward. So let's just jump right into it, and I find that's a good place to begin. Just some administrative stuff real quick. We are in listen-only mode, which means I will not be able to take questions over the phone, but you will see on your interface a little area for a chat box. If you have any questions about anything, just go ahead and plop that right into the chat box, and I'll go ahead and address that then at the end of the presentation. If you come up with questions at the end, please just let me know. I'd be happy to answer any questions. In addition to that, at the end of the day today, I will be providing some other additional resources, how-to guides, just some really good literature that you can take with you to really start to address the issue of 508 compliance. So what is Section 508 compliance and why should we care? Well, according to the National Federation of the Blind, there are currently 1.3 million people in the United States who are blind and an estimated additional 10 million people who have some type of visual impairment. So that means that there are lots and lots of folks out there who have a really difficult time accessing information the way that the vast majority of us do. But in addition to that, just about every single person alive today will be disabled at some point in their lives or another. So for simple issues like myself needing glasses to be able to see 20/20, or if you just left the eye doctor and your pupils have been dilated, to more serious issues like needing crutches for a broken leg or a wheelchair for mobility. At some point in time, everybody experiences the need for assistance in some sort of way. And the same is absolutely true for the work and information that we provide to various audiences in the Park Service. The work that we do is important for the people today, but also for people of tomorrow as well. And as faithful stewards of the American story, it really is our responsibility to ensure that every person has access to the right information to suit their needs. Section 508 is only a process to help ensure that all of the information we provide in an online forum is accessible to as many people as possible. And it's not just the public that can benefit from this type of accessibility. Many times coworkers, colleagues, partners, stakeholders, and people just like that can all benefit from a greater level of access. So through this short introduction to the basic steps of compliance, it's going to be my intent to show you what steps are involved in creating an accessible PDF from Microsoft Word. This is by no means a comprehensive training. It's really more of kind of a taster of how we want to start structuring our workflow to include aspects of 508 compliance. The process might be a complete rehaul of how most of us work, and it does require some time and repetition to achieve the efficiency in this type of workflow. It's kind of like a muscle. The more we exercise it, the stronger it'll be. There's a variety of resources available online through DOI Learn, in-person trainings, all of which can provide you with a greater background to understand how to make accessible documents easier. I implore you all to find as much additional assistance and resources as you can, utilize those out there, and make sure that we're incorporating this as we move on. So let's do a little bit of background about 508 compliance and really just the addressing of disabilities as a whole. And that really stretches all the way back to about 1973 when the Rehabilitation Act is signed. The Rehabilitation Act is really the first federal identification of prohibiting discrimination just on the basis of disabilities. So this is really where we start thinking about things that we tend to think of when we think about the Americans with Disabilities Act and things like that, where we're putting curb cuts onto sidewalks and handrails on stairwells, things like that, wheelchair ramps. It all comes from the Rehabilitation Act to begin with. So in 1979, the Park Service decided to really approach this issue of accessibility in a really comprehensive and an organized way. We really wanted to kind of get out ahead of this and really understand that our parks were destinations for the entirety of the United States and not just people who could easily access them. So starting in about 1980, we started to implement our first real plan. We started working with accessibility coordinators in regional offices and parks, program offices, and really just started to address this issue of how we can incorporate aspects of things like universal design into the work that we do in the buildings we create. So we have a little bit of a lull there till about 1998 when Section 508 is created. And this is really where for our intents and purposes, is the meat of what we're going to be talking about. And Section 508 has to deal with specifically online or electronic documents. You notice that time frame there in 1998. Google's just starting to take off at this point. Yahoo's been on the map for only about a year or so. So it was definitely the dawn of that internet age. And we needed a law to be able to address the accessibility in the internet age. So the Park Service itself in 2000 signed Director's Order 42, which addresses the accessibility for visitors with disabilities in National Park Service programs and the service as a whole. So it's really designed to develop procedures and maintain electronic information technology that everybody has access to. Then in 2001, we signed Director's Order 70, which has to deal with specifically publishing directly to the internet and the intranet. So the bulk of our work gets its authority, so to speak, from Director's Order 42 and Director's Order 70. But for us today, the most important time is going to be this past year in January of 2017. The WCAG 2.0 is released, and WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these are the finalized guidelines of what requirements a document must meet in order to be considered 508 compliant. Now, the reason I say this becomes very important for us is because the Access Board determined that once this was released, that we had until January 18th, 2018 as a deadline to no longer put non-compliant documents on our public-facing or internal-facing websites. So what that really means for us, and a lot of times people hear about this 508 compliance and they get very concerned about maybe thousands, in some cases tens of thousands of documents that might already be online. We will address things that have already been done. What we are more focused on at this point is how we move forward and address 508 compliance in the future, starting today. So we've talked a lot about what an accessible PDF is, and let's take a look at an example of one. So let's take a look at this first document here. Looks pretty normal. In fact, it looks probably like just about anything you've ever read from the Park Service. Even if you've never seen this document before, you would have very little difficulty in understanding and reading the document. The information is laid out clearly in a format you're very familiar with. The title is located at the top of the document, in this case it's a letterhead, and the information is laid out underneath it in almost an outline form. There's headings with supporting information being displayed below. It seems like a pretty straightforward document. Now let's take a look at another document. This one looks decidedly different. The information is exactly the same words or wording are used in both of these documents. There's no difference in the content, but this one's much more difficult to figure out. Now, this document on the right is not completely unusable. Given enough time, I think all of us would eventually be able to figure out what the document is trying to say. We all have enough information gained through daily life to inform us of how to read this document. Well, this is exactly what an example of a document looks like to someone who is in need of a Section 508 compliant document but does not have access to one. The information is there, but it would take that individual a good deal of time to figure out what the message is. And that's really what 508 is. It's a document that has enough information for those with disabilities to be able to access the information effectively, easily, and logically. Section 508 deals completely with providing equal access to information. Utilizing the tenets of creating a Section 508 compliant document will help us to provide supporting information, provide logic and a reading order so that individuals with disabilities can have access to the information. It's that easy. We're just going to provide enough information to let enough people be able to read it. So let's talk a little bit more about exactly what a PDF is. Now, more often than not, most people associate the term Adobe with a PDF, but it is not specifically just an Adobe product. It is not a proprietarily owned product of Adobe. In fact, what PDF technically stands for is it stands for a portable document format. Adobe just happens to be the leader of the most well-known name associated with it. But in terms of taking a file format and taking it from one software to the next or one operating system to the next, the PDF is by far the most effective that we have and is accepted by the most platforms. So the actual PDF itself is going to be made up of 3 individual layers. The first layer is going to be the physical layer, and this is going to just be the visual appearance of the document, what you see when you first pick it up. Not any of the content or anything like that, but literally just the physical look of that document. The layer underneath there is what we call the content layer. And on the content layer, this is going to reveal all of the content that we have, any verbiage, any text, any graphics, anything that is there is going to be found in terms of content is going to be found on our content layer. And then finally, in purposes of 508 compliance, we have what's known as a tags layer, tags layer. And the tags layer becomes really, really important because that is really going to be the key or the legend that our assistive technologies are going to use to be able to access the information that's in our content layer. And really that's what the accessible PDF does, is it allows for a universal access to content through the aid of an assistive technology. So what is an assistive technology? Well, assistive technologies are defined as any object or system that increases or maintains the capability of people with disabilities. And, there's a lot of different types of assistive technologies out there today. So let's just take a couple of the more common types of disabilities we see out there. We have physical disabilities. Assistive technologies for folks who have mobility limitations might be things like wheelchairs, scooters, walkers, canes, crutches, orthotics, prosthetics. Really anything designed to assist your mobility. Folks who might have hearing disabilities, things like hearing aids, closed caption videos, teletyping telephones, all can assist in getting information across to individuals who have a difficult time hearing. And then for our purposes, it's more often than not folks with vision disabilities that use things like screen readers or an audio described video, a refreshable braille display, or even in some cases, GPS can be considered a type of assistive technology. So those assistive technologies can really, really help folks experience the world how those of us without disabilities are able to experience the world. So it's going to be up to us to provide those things like screen readers, the information that we're providing to everybody else. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to take 5 steps to our document compliance. Those 5 steps are going to sound really easy, and they're going to be a pretty straightforward process. But again, it might be a rehaul of how we do our typical work. So please just remember to always flex this muscle, keep exercising it, and keep working at it. So the 5 steps as we move forward are going to basically be to set up our document in a clear and concise way. Any text that we add to the document, we're going to need to format the text that goes with it. If we have any objects on the screen, and objects can be a variety of different things. They could be images, data tables, hyperlinks, anything that's not just regular text are going to need to be formatted. We need to address and format the colors that we use throughout the document. And then once we have all that formatting done, we're going to run an accessibility check and then produce our PDF. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, let's take a little bit closer look at each step in this process. So how do we do it? Well, there's basically 2 paths that you're going to go through to create a 508 compliant document. Either you're going to work on the file from the beginning to end, and you're going to create your own accessible PDF, or you're going to create content that will be given to somebody else to create an accessible document. And even if you're just creating the document to give to somebody else, we can still set them up for success and get used to this new workflow by preparing it so it's a much easier conversion into a 508 compliant document. So let's take a look at what we mean by setting up this document. And setting up a document is really one of the first, obviously the first, but one of the most important aspects of the entire process, because it helps everyone involved in this process locate, open, and switch between the documents. I don't know if you have ever had the experience of working on the wrong version of something out there, but we all know how absolutely frustrating that can be. And more seriously, it can be a very big time waster. So we really want to make sure that we're labeling our documents very easily to understand, concisely, and in a way that it's not going to be hard. It will be hard for somebody to confuse what we're trying to do. So just a real couple basic tips on naming our documents. We want to try to be unique and consistent. Being unique and consistent is really going to help to, if you have things that are very similar, you can kind of get lost in the minutia there. So being unique and consistent is very important. We don't want to attach anything that can change over time or location. So I like to use the example of our centennial year. Any work that was started before the centennial year and going to be done through 2016 and then continued into 2017, it's probably not the best practice to name that as a centennial project because it's not specifically static to that centennial year. So we really want to make sure that we're being as static as possible with how we're naming our documents. I always recommend the use of leading zeros to facilitate a numerical order. You know, 001 is gonna be easier to maintain in a long list of different versions than just 1, 2, 3. It really helps to keep everything even, clean, and concise. I always recommend using lowercase letters unless there's more than one word. Then you'll want to capitalize the first letter of each of those words. And these last two can become kind of very, very important for a specific reason. We really want to do our best to stick to only numbers and letters, and that is because this is the most portable type of document format that we have. We need to make sure that whatever software we're going to be uploading our documents into are going to be able to understand what's there. And certain special characters can have a difficult time being read by different software programs, so really limiting your use of special characters is a wise choice just in general practice. In addition to that, the use of hyphens and underscores instead of spaces is also recommended because in a lot of ways, in a lot of programs rather, spaces are considered to be a special character. So those are some real basic tips. I took all of these tips from the National Archives and Records Administration website. It's a great resource if you ever have concerns or questions about the best ways to keep track of all of your documents and file storage and things like that. So it's a really great area to check. All right, so let's get into what I consider to really be arguably the most important aspect of a 508 compliant document. So the reason I say it's the most important because here in the United States, those of us that are sighted individuals, when we pick up a piece of paper, we know that we start in the upper left-hand corner of the document. We scan each line from left to right, and we move down the page as we read. Most of us are introduced to this way of reading often before we even enter school. And as such, it's really an ingrained aspect of how we process written information visually. Now, there are other cultures around the world that don't read in the same fashion. Some Asian cultures like Japan, for example, use a form of writing called tatagaki, which structures their writing from top to bottom, but they scan from right to left. And in fact, the ancient Egyptians used to write from the bottom of the page to the top, which was one of the reasons early researchers had a difficult time truly understanding the hieroglyphics. So this all becomes really important because the assistive technology is essentially a new reader in the sense that it does not have years of experience with reading in the Western way. So it doesn't have, it is necessary rather to provide the assistive technology with directions on how to read the material that's on the screen. So what we're really doing is we're trying to get in there and provide a legend or a key for that assistive technology to understand what's being processed on the screen. So what we'll do is the text formatting is going to be based on a hierarchy. So that hierarchy, just like an outline would be, and you can kind of see the styles box on the side here with some terms you're probably familiar with, things like title, subtitle, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. That hierarchy, we know that a heading 1 is most likely higher than a heading 3 just on that simple hierarchy right there. And absolutely, assistive technology is able to use that as well. So that hierarchy is then based on what we call tagging. So you're tagging certain parts of the document. But really, tagging is nothing more than just another term for labeling the parts of the document. So again, looking at that styles list on the right-hand side there, what we're essentially doing is we're going to be going into the document and we're going to go to our first heading and we're going to say, this is our heading 1. We'll go to our second heading and say, this style is our heading 2. So we're really just assigning that value of what kind of text we're creating. So when we tell the assistive technology what parts of the page are there, the assistive technology is able to reproduce that information by reading it to individuals with vision disabilities and do so in a logical form. So let's look at our document again then. So what I mean, and you can see this more in practice here, those same parts that we talked about at the beginning get a different term once they go into our tagging section. So our title can either be considered a title or an H1 depending on the need. We have our subtitle underneath there, which is a different style, font, things like that, so that's going to be our H2. Here we have a subtitle 2, which is a little bit smaller, different look again, so we're going to call that H3 for heading 3. Here we have the body or the paragraphs of our text, so it's going to get a P for paragraph or our normal text. Here we have a different heading style, so we're going to call that one heading 4. Here we have a bulleted list, and that's it's a little bit different because we are still providing text, but we're doing so with a visual representation. So we definitely need to make sure we're identifying that as a different type of text than the regular type of text we have in there. And then at the bottom, we also have our hyperlink too, which is a different format, different file, different color. By providing and labeling all of those, if a screen reader were to go down this list, it would understand that it needs to start at the top with the United States Department of Interior, work its way down, hitting those various points based on the logical order that we provided into it. So even special types of text, things like bold, italics, they all have their own values assigned for the assistive technology. So let's go a little bit further into text formatting, and we remember that the text formatting is based on that hierarchy, and that the formatting and hierarchy will provide the necessary information for that assistive technology to read your document. So what we're going to do is we're going to need to logically organize the content that's in there in order for the assistive technology to understand it. So what I think most of us are pretty familiar with is pretty familiar with this little box right here. It's called the manual formatting box. I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of us probably didn't know that that was called the manual formatting box because that's really the only way we're introduced to formatting any of our text inside of Word. We're used to, if we want to put our title on the page, typically the first thing we do is we start with our title, we make it a little bit larger sized font, sometimes we may even put a bold character on there. If you utilize any of these functions off the home ribbon under font, you are not assigning any value to what is there. The assistive technology is never going to be able to unlock what's there because all you're doing is you're just changing the look of things. So kind of think of this box more as like an artistic style, but it's not providing any information. So for this point forward, if you get one thing out of this short course, I want you to remember to never use this box again. So I'm going to show you guys a bunch of really easy ways to be able to manipulate the look and feel of what we have on screen without ever having to use this box. And it's utilizing what I consider to be one of the biggest secret weapons in Microsoft Word, and those are styles. And styles are really important for us because styles really can provide and do provide all of that background information necessary for assistive technologies. So I'm sure all of us have logged into a Microsoft Word at one point in time or another and saw this neat little ribbon right at the top of the home tab there and thought to ourselves, hey, neat, if I ever wanted to make big blue text, there's a box I can click just to make that big blue text. So I didn't really understand what it was for the first time I saw it. However, just based on what we've discussed so far, hopefully you're starting to notice what some of these names are there. We have things like heading 1, heading 2, title, subtitle, intense emphasis, quote, normal. So we know that by using these boxes, we are going to provide that tag, that H1, H2, T, P, by using each one of these boxes. It's putting that tag on each type of content that we're creating. And the beauty is, you're not stuck with that blue all of the time. You can modify these styles to fit any of our needs. And that, I think, is a big problem that Microsoft has. It's not really explaining right off the bat how functional these styles tools can really be. Really, all you have to do is just ensure that you're using the right style type. You know, we can double check in our smaller styles box here and make sure that we have all of the different types of parts of our document that we need. And literally, all you have to do is highlight the content that you desire, then just click the appropriate style. So if we think back to our body of our paragraph, all we want to do from this point forward when we start creating these documents is we just want to put content on the page. We don't want to worry about centering that content. We don't want to worry about making it bold or making it italics or putting a different font on there. All we're going to want to do is just put all of our content from beginning to end on the page and then go back and highlight the sections and name them with our styles. It's going to take some getting used to because it's a different approach than most of us are used to taking, but I promise that eventually it will become more efficient and your work will definitely be much more ready to be 508 compliant. I don't want to say it's always going to be 508 compliant, but we're much better set up there. So really what we're going to have to do in order to do any of this is that we're probably going to have to modify most of our styles in there. We know that in the National Park Service, we utilize the graphic identity program to help carry our brand out there. We utilize specific fonts to help carry the gravity and the gravitas of the National Park Service. We use that black band across the top, or the use of our arrowhead. All of that is really designed to reinforce that this is a National Park Service product. So in order to do that, it's really going to become necessary that we modify the style. And really, all you have to do to modify a style is to right-click any style you like on there. You know, usually I start with the normal one. I like to switch that to our NPS Ralston font because that's typically what the font that we use for the main body of our documents. And I do that right inside this Modify Style radio box here. When this dialog box opens up, you're going to see all of those same functions I told you not to use a moment ago. But because they're found within our style, we know that we're still associating the correct tag with it. We know that as long as we're still in our normal, we can change the font, the size, the color, the bold, the underline of it. Any of those things we can change because it's still going to be associated with that P value. So you can change anything that you like in there. And the really neat thing is that you have the option to either use this just in that one-off document that we're creating at that time, or you can save that style moving forward. Saving that style moving forward, and especially on something like our normal, we know most of our body text tends to be about a size 10 or size 12 font, NPS Ralston, without a bold on there. Save that as your normal, then you don't have to worry about modifying this in the future. So really simple, huge impact, but it definitely takes a little practice. But it's not always going to be the case that we're going to be able to use just the small list of styles that Microsoft provides for us. If we have longer documents with a lot of different sections to them, or you just want a different graphical appeal, because remember, whatever you label as a particular style, that is the only style that can be assigned to that content. So let's say, for example, we have two headings that are at the same level within an outline, but we need two different looks. We're going to need two different styles. So each style can only be used one time. So a lot of times that's really going to create a need for us to create our own styles. So in order to do that, you go back to our ribbon and just click that little drop-down arrow there in the lower right-hand corner. When you do that, this lovely little box opens up, and then you're going to select that small square down in the lower left-hand corner for a new style. And then our Modify Style box is going to come up just like it did before and adjust the settings, whatever you need it to be, and you're good to go. So just with those few easy steps right there, we're still getting our same graphical look that we want to see in our final document, but we're also providing that tags layer with all of that information to understand the document or understand what's on the document. So there is our style. We have now effectively formatted our text. Next, we want to move on to any objects. And like I said before, objects can really include anything, things like images, headers, footers, data tables, watermarks, really anything that's being provided in a visual way. And as far as 508 compliance is concerned, it's necessary for us to provide information for screen readers to access the data that's there. So what that means for us is that, like for images, for example, all images must have some type of alternative text with it, a caption, or information around the image to help unlock what's in that image. If you've ever held your mouse over an image on the web and, a small little yellow box pops up that says, man eating cotton candy, that's alternative text. And we can assign all of that within Microsoft Word. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. Data tables. So we're going to most of us use a lot of data tables, especially when we're trying to convey some, really good complex scientific information. You must insert a table. You cannot use an image or a picture of a table. If you use a picture, there's no way that you're going to be able to encapsulate the information that's in there in any other way. So you're going to have to insert the table. And we will go over this in a little bit further headline, but at any time you can use the function to insert something in Microsoft, we know that we're going to be associating a value in our tag section with that. So whenever the opportunity arises, always use an insert function. We need to use table headers. It's the only way that Assistive Technology is able to understand what is found in your data table. So you definitely need to make sure that we're using headers with all of our tables. And this one seems a little strange, but you must place the table in line with other content. And what I mean by that is if you place a table that is at the bottom of a page and we're discussing it at the top of the page, when a screen reader goes down through there, it's going to be out of a logical order. By placing it in line with the content where it's being discussed is going to keep and maintain that logical order to things. So for headers and footers, again, you want to use the built-in features to insert a header and footer. Always remember, when in doubt, insert. And watermarks is going to be the only different one we have. You know, if we're doing something that's a draft or a not for redistribution, you know, that kind of thing, we're going to have to reproduce that wording somewhere in the document. At current technologies, there is no way for us for assistive technology to access a watermark. So pretty easy. Usually there's not too much involved with the watermark, but just something to think about. So let's look at these a little bit more closely in detail. So, you know, adding alternative text is really not only a necessity, but it is a little bit of an art, because you don't want to, let me back up. What you want to do with alternative text is you are trying to describe the image in as few words as possible. You know, for example, a lot of times we might have a colleague that's in an image and we want to say, oh, this is Jason doing a particular project on this particular day. The average reader probably doesn't know who Jason is. So it's better to say, you know, a man is working on this particular project, or a woman is working on this particular project. Really just trying to be as general as possible and also as short as possible. I usually recommend to try to do it as a tweet, like on Twitter, because you are limited to 140 characters on a tweet. It's usually a good spot to strive for alternative text. So in order to do that, you just go to the image you placed in there and you want to right-click it and select the Format Picture option. When your Format Picture dialog box opens up, you're going to want to select the Layout and Properties icon, which is that icon that is a little square with some arrows pointing to all four corners there. Once you select that, another box is going to open up and you want to select the Alt Text box. In there, you are going to want to put the information into the description section in there. The title is not necessarily as important as the description is. The title really becomes more important when we have a lot of images within a document. One of the really neat hidden features of styles is that when you appropriately use styles, you can actually automatically generate a table of contents at the end. If you have a lot of images, putting a title in there is going to help with that logical ordering of the table of contents. So that's one feature in there. So I don't worry too heavily about title for my own work, but I definitely absolutely want to include some alternative text within our description box. So creating a table, like I said, we want to go up to the Insert tab on the ribbon, because when in doubt, always insert. You'll then select the Insert Table function here from the table there. That's got a nice little drop-down arrow. You're going to have a lot of different options that you can choose from, and you're going to get this great Table Tools section there. There's one thing I want to talk about, though. Before we go through and start adding all of the content to our table, there is one function that we want to take care of. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the repeat header rows function is enabled. By enabling that function, we're allowing the assistive technology to understand that the headers are present in all aspects, both on the x-axis and the y-axis of our table. So by having that little function enabled does allow us to be able to unlock all that information. So please always make sure that you have repeat header rows enabled. So our hyperlinks. Now our hyperlinks probably isn't going to be a huge departure from what we're used to doing. You know, most of us typically highlight the content that we want to become a hyperlink, and then we right-click it and use the Select Hyperlink function. So when we do that, this little Insert Hyperlink box pops up. And when that does, there's two areas where we have the opportunity to kind of affect the information in there, either the text to display or the address. And, you know, obviously text to display is what's going to be displayed in your document, and the address is the link to which you're sending your reader to. Now, for Section 508 compliance, we do require that the full URL be spelled out unless we use screen tips, and I'll talk about screen tips in just a second. So if you can envision a time you've been on a web page or, you know, a big document, things like that, and there's a big section of click here for more information, click here for more information. If there's a few of those on the screen, you can imagine what that would look like to, sound like to somebody who's listening to that via a screen reader. That's just going to be click here for more information, click here for more information, click here for more information, click here for more information. It's pretty much unusable is really what it becomes. So we really want to make sure that we're utilizing the entire URL on screen where appropriate. In addition to folks with vision disabilities, if somebody happens to have a paper copy of your document, there would be no way for them to access that information either. So by having it spelled out in its entirety would allow somebody to be able to access that, you know, even from a printed copy of that. But, you know, it's not always ideal to have all of our URLs written out on screen. So I'm going to point out what a screen tip is, but I always recommend using a bit of caution and not using these abundantly. But a screen tip is effectively an alternative text for words on a screen. So if you've ever held your mouse over one of those areas that says click here for more information and a link pops up, that link that you see there is our screen tip. So the screen tip will actually read that full URL out to an individual. So we definitely want to use the screen tips if you need to. Just click that screen tip box up in the upper right-hand corner. The set hyperlink screen tip will come up. My usual recommendation to fall within 140 characters is to not have it leave that line. Try your best to keep it in that line. Sometimes long URLs, there's no way that we can do anything about it. So, all right. So lists. Lists is another example of what we can use the insert function for. You know, we know that lists can either be bullets or they could be numbers. You know, either way, we want to utilize that insert function in there. Because again, once we put those bullets in front or we put those numbers in front there, what we're doing is we are grouping that information together visually, so we need to make sure that we're accurately representing that. But this is also a good spot for us to kind of do a midterm accessibility check, because what you'll find is that if you use that function there with either the bullets or the numbers, as you start typing, your list paragraph box will suddenly be engaged. And that says to us that we now have absolutely applied that same list tag underneath to the assistive technology, and it means we know it's working. So as long as the appropriate styles are showing up for the appropriate type of content, then we know what we're doing is at least working for right now. So we went through and we addressed all of our big issues, things like images, tables, hyperlinks, all of that stuff. Now we need to think about our color. And color is something I don't think a lot of us put too much thought into other than whether or not we like a particular color. But color has a lot of different aspects, especially when it comes to 508 compliance. And what I mean by that is you don't ever want to use color alone to convey any kind of message, right? So let's take a look at an example of something that most of us as sighted individuals have encountered before. The traffic light is absolutely designed to convey a message with solely color. You know, those of us that pull up to it, we know that we can see a red, a yellow, or green light that's up there. If somebody were blind or has difficulty seeing, I hope they're not driving, but they are not going to be able to access the information that's there. And the same is true with our documents. So we're going to need to capture that information in some other way. So that way we can convey, that red means stop, yellow means caution, and green means go. So let's take a look at this and maybe something we might be using, right? So those of us as sighted individuals most likely can look at this and garner some really quick basic information. We know Project A is probably doing, pretty good. It's got that nice bright green on there. Project B might be somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's at risk of being late or overdue or something like that. And maybe Project C is late or it's not good, it's wrong or something. It really conveys a message to us. But non-sighted individuals are going to have no opportunity to understand what's there. But with one simple change, we can unlock that information for them. And it has not taken away from the graphical representation of what we're trying to do. We can still see the green with A, the yellow with B, and the red with C, but now we've provided that background information for those individuals. We know that A is on time, B is at risk, and C is late. So definitely want to start thinking about that kind of thing. And it's not just color, it really applies to all sensory information, size, shape, location on the page, all of those things that are conveying a message without utilizing a word. You have to kind of think about that. Would you be able to provide that message if that image wasn't there, or that color wasn't there? Something to think about. There's another aspect of color that we only ever notice when it's glaring, and that's color contrast. And it's really, really important, not just for folks who have difficulty with vision. It's also difficult for really just about anybody. So let's take a look at this box right here. This is a nice kind of matrix of what different colors look like on different colors. You know, the industry standard for a long time has been a white background with black text, and we know that that's great, but you can see that the black text isn't necessarily the best for every particular area, every particular color. There's no one size fits all. If you've ever tried to read a dark green background with just a barely lighter green font on top, your eyes start to strain. It's really, really difficult. So we need to make sure that we're maintaining a high level of contrast between our foreground and our background colors. You know, there is a specific contrast ratio depending on the size of the text that we need to meet in order for it to be considered 508 compliant. And there's a couple tools that can really inform us. You know, a really simple tool we can use is just the basic color wheel, you know, introduced to us at a very early age. It's really functional for us because we know we can take a slice of a color there and look directly across, and that color is usually its direct opposite contrast. So looking at this here, we know that if we had a purple background, perhaps, or we want to use a yellow text, you know we're going to have a really nice high contrast ratio there. Sometimes we need a little bit more help, and there's a lot of really great resources online. I particularly like to use the WebAIM contrast checker. I like this because you can put the RGB color numbers right in there and find out exactly where those two colors fall within contrast with one another. But the really neat thing that's on here is this little slider you see right in this area right here. You can actually slide that either lighter or darker to ensure that all of your text is passing. So that allows you to use the colors that you want to use while still hitting that contrast ratio. So something to think about, because 508 compliance doesn't always benefit just folks with disabilities. It can really benefit everybody. So we have gone through, we've formatted all of our text, we've formatted all of our objects, we've addressed our color, and now it's time to check our work. So before you finalize the document, we do need to check for accessibility issues, and this is kind of a difficult time for us because in Microsoft Office 2016, which is part of the Windows 10 upgrade that some folks have received, some have yet to receive, there is an Acrobat add-in automatically built into Microsoft so that we can use these accessibility functions. Some older versions of Microsoft may not have this, so we may have to either do an Acrobat add-in or we may have to pull it out and do it in another program for our accessibility check. If anybody has issues with not being able to access this, please just shoot me an email at some point in time and we can address that then. But we're going to take this from where our workflow is moving towards, and that is the use of Microsoft Office 2016, which does have these functions. So what you want to do is you just want to navigate over to the File option, and then once you click on File, this box will open up that you see here, and you'll see the info all the way on the top, and you want to select the info. You want to select the Check for Issues box, which is that center box right in there, and when you select that box, get a couple different options right there, and you want to check the accessibility. Now, when you click that option, you're going to get another box that comes up, and ultimately, this is what you want to see. You want to see the note that says, no accessibility issues were found. People with disabilities should not have difficulty reading this document. If there was some sort of issue with the document, it would be listed here with tips on how to remediate that. If there were too many issues on there, it might recommend that you try a different way. It's a really, really handy tool to help us to check the work. It's certainly by no means infallible, so we want to check early, check often. You know, I check a few times throughout the creation of my documents just to make sure I don't have a huge workload at the end. So we always want to make sure that we're going through and checking our accessibility. Once you get that accessibility cleared off, we know we're ready to go and convert it to a PDF. The really nice thing, again, is in that Microsoft Office 2016, we can create that PDF directly from Word. So you just want to navigate to that Acrobat tab within the ribbon there. And before we convert it to a PDF, what we want to do is we need to select some preferences and change a few things here real quick. Once you click that option to select preferences, you're going to get your PDF Maker options box to come up. And you want to make sure that the Enable Accessibility and Reflow with a Tag Adobe PDF is selected. Now, in our day and age, we now access electronic information on a variety of different screens, whether it's our desktop computers, laptop computers, tablets, handhelds, cell phones, smartphones, everything in between. Whenever we change the size of the screen we display our information, we have to do what's called reflowing our text. So that way you don't have to constantly scroll across smaller screens to access all the information. By selecting this option, it's going to allow the PDF to reflow with that while still maintaining all of those tags we've taken all that time to put in there. So we want to make sure that always we have that Enable Accessibility and Reflow with Tagged Adobe PDF option selected. Once you verify that that's selected, you select Create PDF. And there it is. We now have a Section 508 compliant document ready to go. So that was a lot. There was a lot of steps in there, pretty simple, but I just want to go over the basic steps to the compliance one more time. You know, we really just want to set up our document, make sure that we're starting off on the right foot. We got our feet in a great place to start. We want to format our text. We want to make sure that we format all the objects, all of that stuff. We want to make sure that we do our color formatting. And then ultimately, we do our accessibility check and production. So there it is, all of that in about 50 minutes, and we're going to be all 508 compliant experts by the end of it. I did see at least a few questions come through, so let me see if I can get up here to our chat section and address any of those questions. So I had a question here that says, where can we learn how to make PDFs of non-born digital old documents 508 compliant? At this point, we don't have a full plan on how we're going to address the old documents, but we are more concerned about with the new documents that we create. We want to make sure that we're not adding to that workload any further. There are a lot of different third-party operators out there that we can contract through to do remediation work for. There's opportunities to hire folks like myself who are detailed to come in and help identify that. But for our intents and purposes, especially in this course today, is really how we move forward with Section 508 compliance. And then I also have a question as to whether or not I'll be sharing this recording. I will be sharing this recording. I'm going to send an email out in a little while to everybody who participated this week, and I will be including some links as well as some other resources for how to do this on your own. Anybody else have any burning questions or anything else they'd like to know? All right, well, I want to thank you all very much. My name again is Ryan Stubblebine. I will put that up here. I think this will work for us. If anybody has any questions or anything for me, you're more than welcome to email me at any point, and I'd be happy to share my knowledge with you best I can. And if I can't answer, we'll definitely find an answer for you. But otherwise, from those of us at NCPTT, we thank you very much, and we hope you have a wonderful day.